The ACES Fun, From Noisy Outlands, Unfriendly Blobs, and Some Other Things, by Jenny Duprou. Essential question: what is the difference between hearing and listening? Martin loves his big family, but there is barely enough room for him in his crowded urban apartment. He spends a lot of time skating outdoors, feeling that there is a void in his life he ought to fill. When he finds a cell phone in the park one day, Martin presses the speed dial numbers to see if he can identify its owner. He gets nowhere until he presses the number 5. The phone rang only once, then there was a click and a brief silence, and then came a sound unlike anything he'd heard before. It seemed to come from both far away and near, a clamor made up of 1,000 thread-like voices, and along with the noise came a blast of feeling so strong it nearly knocked him off the bench. He pitched forward as if he'd gotten a sudden terrible cramp. The feeling poured into his ear and floated down through his chest and into his blood and raced like fire all through his body. It wasn't rage or fear or joy or love, but a mixture of all of them, so strong that he cried out and dropped the phone on the ground. The pigeons think it might be something to eat, flocked around it. He bent down to pick it up, shaking it. Cautiously he put the phone near his ear, not right against it this time, and listened. The strange immense chorus of sound still poured out, and the feeling jolted him again. It was so strong that he couldn't stay sitting on the bench. He had to get up and move. He paced furiously around the playground, under the swings, over to the slide around the jungle gym. It was a good thing no one was there. He knew he looked very odd, as if the wind was blowing him this way and that. After a long time he began to notice something. The feeling that shot through him changed slightly as he changed his direction. When he walked toward the baseball diamond, his heart beat harder, as if he were afraid. When he walked toward Avenue B, he grew calmer. When he went out of the park and down 14th Street, he felt weighed down by sadness. It was like the game where you are looking for something and the other person says, "You're hot." No, you are getting colder. No, really cold. Now you are hot again. But what was he looking for? He had no idea. The next day he had a terrible time concentrating at school. He was wildly impatient to try out the phone again. It wasn't quite as cold, so a few people were in the park when he got there. A mother pushing her toddler on a swing, a couple of kids going backwards down the slide, and an old woman in a knit hat and a lumpy purplish coat trudging along the path by the baseball diamond. Analyze the text. Alliteration. On page 108, the author used the alliteration, repeating and beginning consonant sound in a series of words to emphasize important ideas or to create a mood. Where does the author use alliteration on page 110? How does it affect the mood of the scene? Martin stood within a clump of trees at the corner of the park, turned on the phone and pressed 5. Once again, the torrent of sound feeling rushed through him and forced him to start walking. He went toward Avenue B, since that had made the feeling calmer yesterday, but it didn't work today. Everything was different. He felt a pang of fear as he went toward the jungle gym, and a jolt of joy as he neared the picnic tables. Finally, when he got back to the park bench, he just stopped. He turned off the phone and sat down completely confused. That was when he felt a poke on his back, and a voice said, "That phone you got, that's mine." He whirled around. Behind him stood the old woman he'd seen before. She was glaring at him from under the rim of her knit hat, which looked like a purple pancake drooping just above her eyes. She pointed to the phone in his hand and said again, "That's mine. I must dropped it yesterday." Martin held on to it tighter. "Prove it," he said. The old woman laughed. "Easy. I bet you called my number 5, right?" He just stared at her. All of a sudden he recognized her. Mrs. de Salville was her name, though she was usually called just Mrs. D. He'd seen her for years around the neighborhood, always tramping along with a phone held to her ear. People joked about her. They said she must have the most long-winded family in the world because she always seemed to be listening, hardly ever talking. "Ever heard anything like that before?" she said. He shook his head. "What is it?" She came around to his side of the bench and sat down beside him with a thumb, wafting out a smell that reminded Martin of a pastrami sandwich. "Why should I tell you?" she said. "Because you want your phone back," said Martin, edging away and putting the phone in his pocket. She pinned him with her eyes. They were clear eyes, Martin saw. "First," she said, "you tell me about you. Who are you? Talk to me." He could have just stood up and walked away or run. She could never have caught him, but he thought the phone probably was hers, which meant she knew what was going on with it, and he wanted to know too. So he talked. She listened. She said, "Good, good," when he told her about skating. She frowned and bunched her lips up when he told her about where he lived. The too small, too crowded, too noisy apartment that he didn't want to go home to after school. "You should have a job after school," she said. "Yeah," said Martin, "but I don't know how to do anything." She leaned close to him and spoke in a low voice. "Do you like animals?" "Animals? Sure." "What kind?" "All kinds, I guess." "You like dogs?" "Yeah. Wish I had one." "Why don't you them?" "No dogs allowed in the building." "All right," said the old woman. She took some crumbs out of her pocket and tossed them to the pigeons who clustered around her feet. "Now, can you handle the strange?" "What?" "The strange," she said irritably. "You know, the strange, the unusual, the slightly weird. Can you handle that?" "Sure," said Martin. He liked the strange and unusual. "I wouldn't tell you this if I thought you were going to laugh," she said, "or spread it out to your friends." "I wouldn't," said Martin, which was the truth. "I have this hunch you might be the one. That's why I'm telling you," she said. "The one?" said Martin. "What one?" But she didn't answer. She just studied his face, as if his brown eyes, his wavy black hair, and his chipped front tooth were giving her some kind of clue about him. "All right, then," she said finally. "That number you called?" She paused. She squinted up her eyes. She lowered her voice to a hoarse whisper. "That number taps you into the dogs." Martin stared at her. He didn't get it. "What?" he said. A gust of wind blew some crumpled food wrappings across the playground. The pigeons rose into the air and settled again. "Let's walk around," the old woman said. "I'm freezing to death sitting here like this." So they walked around the path that circled the playground, around, and she explained. "You know dogs," she said. "They don't talk. They don't have the words, just the feelings. They got feelings so strong they fill up the air, like." She waved her hands around like a big network of radio waves. "This phone taps into the network. If you're not used to it, you call that number and the feelings come roaring through and knock you down." "That's what happened to me," Martin said. "But what's the point of a phone like that? And where did you get it?" "An old guy in my building gave it to me," she said, "a long time ago, and the point of it is ACES." "What is that?" "Assistance for Canines in Emergency Situation, ACES." "I don't understand," said Martin. "Let's sit down," she said. "My feet hurt walking around like this." So they sat down again. "You figure out that the feeling changes when you change direction," she said. "I saw you doing it." "Yeah," Martin said, "but I don't know why." "Let me have the phone," she said, holding out her hand. Martin gave it to her. She punched in the number. She frowned, clenched her jaw, and put the phone to her ear. For a few seconds she listened. Then she nodded and handed the phone to Martin. "Hold yourself strong," she said, "and you can take it." He tightened all his muscles and listened. Again the feelings rummaged through him, but they didn't strike him down. "Okay," said Mrs. D. "That's good." She took the phone back and turned it off. "Now, here's what you're hearing. This network here covers about 20 blocks. There is others all over the city. You don't have to worry about them. For this one, the park is the center. We are getting the vibes of all the dogs in that 20-block area, pets and strays both. What you're hearing is like hundreds of little streams all running together in one huge river. You listen real hard and careful, and you can hear the different, well, not voice exactly, more like transmissions." "I figured that out," said Martin. "If you keep trying, you can find the way that feels better." "That," said the old woman, "is exactly what you don't want to do. You got to go the way that feels worse. That is the whole point." She fastened the top button of her coat and turned the collar up. "Come on," she said, "I'll show you." So Martin walked. He set out up Avenue B, grinding his teeth because the sad feeling was indeed getting worse. The way was thin and far away, like a needle of sound, and the sadness was like a stone in his chest. Every time the stone grew lighter, he knew he was going the wrong way. He had to pick out the fifth wheel from the chorus and turn toward it again and again. The whole time Mrs. de Salville kept talking. Last week, out near Anderson Avenue, I found a little mutt that got the worst of a dog fight. One side of him all bloody. She stumped along beside him, shaking her head. We got an arrangement with the animal shelter, by the way, she said. They fix up ACES dogs for free. Analyze the text, style and tone. How does the author maintain a consistent tone and sadness as Martin follows the signals to the dog in distress? They were in Martin's neighborhood now. That's where I live, he said, pointing at his building on the third floor. There are 7 of us. He would have told her more about how his father wanted to look for a better place but never had time, about how he had to share his room with a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. But the stone in his chest was dragging on his words, making them heavy and hard to say. He fought against the desire to sit down on the sidewalk and curl up into a ball. Then there is the worst ones, said Mrs. D, after a quick glance at his building. They turned the corner onto 18th Street. That's when you find people being cruel to their dogs. Now, this I can't stand. Martin put his free hand over his other ear. He didn't want to hear about it. The sadness come at him over the phone was almost more than he could stand. The stone in his chest felt like a load of bricks now, attached by a chain to his heart. They turned up Carter Street and went by the Chinese grocery and the noodle shop and the dry cleaners. Every now and then, Mrs. D took the phone from him and listened herself to make sure he was doing it right. This is a real heavy one for your first time, she said. Sorry about that. Past the used bookstore, they went past the ice cream place. Martin's knees wanted to crumble. His feet weighed 10 pounds apiece. But it isn't all bad. I want you to know, Mrs. D went on. I can't tell you how many lost dogs I've returned to their families. Martin wasn't listening. He was afraid he couldn't stand it anymore. He thought he might collapse onto the curb and start sobbing. I can't do this. He gasped out the words, and at first she didn't hear him. I can't, he said again, but he kept going anyhow, and in a minute he realized something odd. He'd come to a spot where, no matter what directions he took, the feeling grew just a tiny bit weaker. If he stood still, it was horribly strong. He told her so. Then we're here, she said. This is it. All right, now listen again. You should hear that one voice all by itself now. He listened. The doleful feeling led him up the first flight of stairs and down a hall. At the end was an open door. It was clear that whoever lived here had moved out. Big tapped-up cardboard boxes stood in the hall. You want me to take over now? Said Mrs. D. Martin shook his head. He wasn't going to go through all this just to quit at the end. Then go in there and find out what's going on, she said. I'll wait for you out here. Martin turned off the phone and handed it to Mrs. D. He stepped into the apartment and it was nearly empty, except for a rolled-up carpet. He smelled paint. The only noise was a faint scraping sound coming from another room. He followed the sound. In the living room, which overlooked the street, stood a man facing the windows, with his back to Martin. He was tapping a piece of paper to the glass. "Excuse me," Martin said. The man turned around. "Who are you, kid?" Martin said his name. "Is there a dog here?" he asked. "Sure is," said the man. "And there, in the kitchen." He pointed across the hall. People left him behind. Can you believe it? Just left him without a word. He turned back to his tapping. "So I got to take him to the pound unless you want him." Martin went into the kitchen. There, under the kitchen table, tied to a table leg with a piece of rope, was a curled-up heap of sorrel. A small dog, white with brown patches and triangle ears. Without raising his head, he swiveled his eyes to look up at Martin. His tail was tucked down around his rump. He was trembling. Martin squatted down and put his hand on the dog's back. "Hey, dog," he said quietly. "Hey, good dog. I'm here now." He untied the rope from the table leg and coaxed the dog to his feet. Slowly, he led him out of the kitchen. The man was sweeping the floor of the living room now. Martin looked at the piece of paper taped to the window. It said, "For rent." "How much?" he asked. The man told him. Martin's heart sped up. "How many bedrooms?" "4," the man said. Martin's heart beat so hard it made his voice shake. "I know a family that might like it," he said. "Nice people, my family. Will you hold it till I can get my father to come look?" "Okay," said the man, "but you better get him right now. This place is going to go fast." Analyze the text. Story structure. What episodes in the story had to take place in order for Martin to find out about the apartment for rent? She nodded once and handed him the phone. Then she reached out and snatched it back again. She hit the 5 button and held the phone to her ear. "Just want to listen one more time," she said. She stood there for a minute or so. Then she turned and stumped away. And in the months and years that followed, people in the neighborhood around 14th Street Park became accustomed to seeing a tall boy on his inline skates every afternoon gliding along the streets with a cell phone pressed to his ear. They figured he was a delivery boy of some kind. He never told anyone what his job really was. To his family and friends, he said he was out practicing his skating. It was true that he got a lot of practice. Some days he skated for miles, answered dozens of urgent calls. Other days there might be only 2 calls or only 1. And now and then came a day when the feelings pouring through the phone contained not a single thread of distress, when all the dogs in all the 20 blocks were well fed and content, either safe at home or romping happily with their people. On those afternoons, Martin left his skates in the apartment at 350 Lincoln Avenue, went to the 14th Street Park and played ball with his own dog, who was no longer sad. Communications among creatures. Like other works in the genre of science fiction, Jenny Dupro's The ACES Phones is predicted upon ideas about science and technology, imaginative explorations drawing upon the author's love of science and her ideas about a possible future for technological innovation. Sometime in the not too distant future, perhaps humans and other creatures could conceivably communicate with each other using powerful new technology innovations. Even using special cell phones that could intercept feelings waves from dogs. However, though such advances might be at least remotely plausible, this assistance for canines and emergency situations, cell phone technology does not currently exist. Even without ACES cell phones, however, we humans are learning to comprehend some facets of other animals' emotional states and to interpret some of the information they communicate, either directly to us or among themselves. Animal communication, much like human communication, uses the powers of the sensory organs, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin, to transmit and receive messages. Animals signal each other and intercept each other's signals via visual communication, sight, acoustical communication, hearing, chemical communication, smell and taste, and tactile communication, touch. Visual messages from animals are signals that other animals and sometimes people can see. One example is canine play bowing. A dog or other canine, such as a wolf, will bow to another to signal a willingness to play and an absence of aggression. When a dog bows to another dog, lowering its chest toward the ground and crouching down on its front legs while wagging its tail, it is inviting the other dog to run, to play, to have fun. The bowing dog is also signaling an absence of aggression, saying in essence, I won't try to hurt you. This is all just for fun. You may have observed enthusiastic pet dogs make this gesture toward their human companions too. They are communicating, let's play, with canine body language. Acoustical or sound-based signals are messages transmitted via sound waves to other animals which perceive the message and interpret the information conveyed in them, sometimes as warnings or threats, sometimes as words of welcome. Some species of animals emit quite specific sounds to communicate specific information to other animals, either members of the animal's own social network or outsiders. The vervet monkey, for example, a creature that lives in a complex social groups in parts of Eastern Africa, uses distinct calls to warn the other members of its troop of different types of dangerous predators. One vervet call might indicate that a hungry leopard is approaching the troop, and another might warn of a poisonous snake entering the troop's vicinity. Zoologists are still unraveling many mysteries of animal sensory communication. For example, chemical messages called pheromones, which involve smell and taste, are different for humans to perceive and study. Tactile communications involving touch are often easier to understand. Anyone who has had a cat rub up against his or her leg can at least guess at the ideas being expressed. I like you, or perhaps, I'm here, notice me. The multifaceted, sometimes surprising domain of sensory communication among animals can be fascinating to explore. There is still a great deal for us humans to attempt to understand. As far as we know, our closest friends, the canines, are not yet capable of communicating with us or with each other by cellular telephone. That capability still lies squarely within the realm of literature and, in particular, science fiction. However, dogs and other animals most certainly do communicate in myriad ways, both with others of their species and on occasion with people. With what you have already learned, you can now interpret at least one sensory message that the creature in your neighborhood might send. The next time a dog bows to you, he or she is not trying to be formal. It's playtime.